3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? How's it hanging, Hakeem?
I should be in a pool right now, but I just realized something about you just now.
Oh
that
no, what?
You might not even know yourself, or maybe you do. Do you realize that your last name is a sentence?
Krinsky?
No. Krypton in sky. The element krypton, whose symbol is KR, N-I-N, sky, S-K-Y. Krypton in sky is your last name.
That's super cool.
Well, it
I
depends.
just better not bump into Superman, but
Is it that krypton or is it the element krypton? That's what I'm trying to figure out. When you get in the sun, how do you feel? That's the question.
when I get in this,
Strong? Buoyant?
Depends how long I've been in the sun. What does Krypton do when it's in the what does the real element Krypton do when it's in the sun?
Nothing, but Superman gets his powers from the sun. So if
Mhm.
you're from the planet Krypton, if that's what your name means, then the sun should power you up. But if it's the element Krypton, it's a noble gas. So you're just nobility.
Aren't I kind of nobility anyway?
Anyway, the
Anyway,
queen.
but I'm one of those people who is always cold. Like if I have a choice of being too hot or too cold, I'd always rather be too hot. I'm, needing to go. Yeah, I hate being cold. Like when I'm too cold, I just fall asleep.
You're Mrs. Heat Miser.
I'm Mr. Down, 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 of
Mr.
101.
101. That's my blood pressure. No, I'm just kidding.
I do tend to have low blood pressure, so I don't know if that is related to any of it. But
I don't know why, but I am always right in the good zone. I'm like 110/70. I'm just like, how can this be? I'm like 850 years old, right?
What?
I eat chitlins every day. How do I have
Do
such
you
good
really?
blood pressure?
Wait, can I ask you something that's kind of embarrassing that I don't know?
Yes.
What exactly is a chitlin?
A chitlin is the small intestine of a pig. And, if you buy them frozen, uncleaned in that bucket, you got to let them thaw out for like 3 days to get them actually thawed out. And then it takes another 3 days of cleaning them to get them ready to cook. And you might want to buy 2 or 3 buckets because once you clean them, you go from like 25 pounds to like 6 ounces. So,
I will eat the things if it is necessary for survival, but until it gets to the point where it's necessary for survival, I'm going to hang on to my picky eating habits.
Okay. All right. Deal. I like that
Deal?
because it always gets to the point of survival. So,
Right.
it always
If it
ends up
gets
there.
necessary, I will follow you into the zombie apocalypse and you can be the chef.
That's zombie butt. So, my love, what are we talking about today?
Well, speaking of things that maybe are a little bit gross and gory, we are going to talk about a classic Hollywood film, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, specifically an iconic scene where a heart is pulled out of a human body.
Wow, that sounds very iconic.
So a little bit of background for folks who are tuning into Does It Fly for the first time. The way our show works is we examine a particular device or happening in a film. Hakeem talks about the science of it. Does it fly? Was it possible? Is it possible? Could it ever be possible based on the science of it all? I'll then look at it from a story perspective. They've created this world within the world that's been created. Does it work in story world? And then we will get to part 3, which is, does it fly for the feels?
That's right. And you will pick up on our personalities because I'm going to fly off on tangents on occasion. I don't do it on purpose. It just kind of just happens organically. But my Tamara she knows what's happening at all times. So she'll reel me back in. So if I start going on a tangent, it seems like we're talking about this scene. And the next thing you know, we're talking about the mating habits of prehistoric salmon. Tomorrow's going to reel me in. You don't have to worry.
Now my brain is going on the mating habits of that. I also have to give a shout out to our producers who also keep us in line
Yay.
during the show. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Oh, we do
shout out
have
to all of
those,
our
don't
producers.
we? Yeah, we have a
We
team.
do. Yeah, we have a team and they're awesome. So
They are awesome.
we have some hearts to talk about.
Oh, heart to heart. Let's have a heart to heart.
Let's have a heart to heart about this topic.
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
this scene is the iconic scene. And listen, I don't know if you're aware of this. So the iconic scene is the heart taken out of the chest of a heart extraction ritual subject. But there's another heart removal scene that I think is hilarious. It's
Do
in
tell.
Dumb and Dumber when Jim Carrey is having, he first fights the waiters and then Chef comes out, he's revealed,
Mhm.
and he just comes out kicking Jim Carrey's butt. And when he finally knocks him out, Jim Carrey pops back up, wipes the blood, reaches in his heart, pulls it out, is still beating. He drops it in a doggy bag and hands it to the guy, and the guy goes,
Do you remember when you first saw this? Like, did you see this in a movie theater? Did you see
No.
it?
I did not see. I was very late to all of Indiana Jones because I was broke young, and this stuff came out when I was young. So going to the theater was a big deal. In the 90s, I got to a point where I made it, I consciously thought, where am I going to spend my hard-earned theater dollars? Right. And so
Right.
for
Okay.
me, the distinction was what is going to work better? What does the theater have that I don't have at home? Right? That giant screen and that amazing sound system. So if it had amazing sounds, like for example, one of my favorite soundtracks was from the movie where Mark Wahlberg was a adult film star. That scene where he jumps in the pool and is it Ohio players, that drum solo, right? Just these
Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights.
Boogie Nights, exactly.
Yeah.
Loved it. Yes. So anyway, the Indiana Jones movies, I didn't really understand them when they came out. So I waited, and I heard all the hype. And one of the things that's rare for me is when a movie that's hyped up that I watch it late, I'm still impressed by the movie. And Indiana Jones was one of those for me. I still dug it, even though it was pre-hyped.
Well, it's also interesting to hear you talk about like what is worthy of seeing on a big screen, because I still ask that question today because movie ticket prices are like way up there.
Yeah.
But like when you think, and I judge it by the same thing, like what can I get in the theater that maybe now I can't get at home? And this movie, it was nominated, speaking of sound, it was nominated for Best Score. John Williams, amazing, frequent collaborator of Steven Spielberg. And it won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects.
I should have gone to the theater.
You should have gone to the theater. I did not see it in the theater for the first time.
Yeah.
I actually saw it in my gym class at school.
Really? How did
Yes.
that happen?
I don't know, and I'm not sure why they thought it was okay to show to us, but I mean, I know why it happened. I don't know why they thought it was okay to show to us, because I specifically remember watching it in 5th grade. Basically, what would happen was, like, growing up in like sweaty, humid New Jersey during the summer, like we were in school until the end of June. And so those last couple of weeks were just kind of nasty and schwitzy. And sometimes for gym class, if it was one of those days, instead of like making us run around, they would just like pop in, a VHS or DVD or whatever it was. And so that is where I saw this for the first time.
That's pretty heavy for 10-year-olds, right?
Yeah, I don't know why they thought it was well, actually I do know why they thought it was okay to show to 10-year-olds, because it was a PG. So they figured, all right, we've got a guardian in the room and it's fine.
Yeah.
We'll get to talking more about that later.
Yeah, kind of heavy for 10-year-olds. So what is the scene? Should you describe it? Have we already described it? The scene?
Well, I think we might have given a brief overview. So basically, Indy and his cohorts are Short Round, who is, as everybody now knows, is Ki-Hai Kwan, who has been rediscovered by the world at large from everything all together, everything everywhere all at once. So Indy, Short Round, and a nightclub singer named Willie Scott that they have picked up are on an adventure in India. And they have taken on the mission to recover a sacred stone that belongs to the village and was stolen and is now being hidden in the catacombs of this palace. By the way, there are clearly some spoilers here, but since this is a movie from 1984, hopefully you've seen it already. We're not ruining anything. If you don't want anything to know anything more, hit pause, go watch, come back, listen to us. So, okay, so basically, Indy and buddies discover there is a human sacrifice ritual that is taking place in the mines and the catacombs underneath this palace. And the three of them sneak down and observe this ceremony. And this is where we see the heart being ripped out of the body.
I like to look at this particular scene scientifically in three parts. One is, how is the heart accessed to be removed in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Then the second part is, how does the human behave now that their heart is removed from their chest?
Mm-hmm.
And in the third part, it is, how does the heart behave? And so, of any of those, what is consistent with science and what is not? So let's go to the first one. It turns out that there was a groundbreaking scientific paper about actual heart extraction rituals in Mesoamerica centuries ago, and how they actually went in and removed hearts because it's something that really happened. All right. You have to appease those gods. What better way than a human sacrifice? You don't have a volcano handy? Take out their heart.
Okay.
There you go. Right. So, we know that these rituals were a part of those societies and others, right? Human sacrifice is something that existed, just like animal sacrifice.
Right. And just to be clear, by Mesoamerica, we mean the area that is now commonly referred to as Central America, which is not where this movie takes place. This movie takes place very specifically, the story in the movie takes place in India.
That's right. And so basically, I bring this up to just point out the fact that heart extraction rituals of this sort have existed on Earth prior.
It was a thing.
It was a thing. So what they did is, they looked at various ways of getting to the data, but of course that involved studying skeletons. And what they found was that the method of extraction was in one of three ways. They either went in from under the rib cage, or they went between two ribs, or they cut the sternum in half and went in that way to get the heart out.
So like by cutting, when you say that means like sternum in half is like basically going down the middle?
I don't know. I
Like
thought
cracking here?
for some reason I thought this, but it could have been that way. I'm not so sure. I did a brief.
But this part, getting this part.
Yeah, right in the center of the chest there. So
Okay.
instead of going between two left ribs or going under the rib cage, they would open the sternum.
Do you feel like when you talk about going through the ribs, all I can picture is like laparoscopic surgery? Because like I can't picture like if you go through two ribs, like being able to pull out a heart.
Yeah.
But like when I got my appendix out, they did it laparoscopically. And so I just
Right.
have, these little teeny tiny holes.
Yeah, exactly. I have a big scar right here. I had a full shoulder reconstruction. I have a titanium screw in there right now.
Oh.
Yeah, it happened during my fight with the Hulk. He got one blow in, broke my shoulder. I had to get a surgical repaired. Otherwise, I didn't even use a clothes. I just slapped the Hulk around. Right. So he was crying. You ever seen the Hulk cry? It is not something you want to see. I had to hold him, and we cuddled through the night. So anyway, the point is, in this movie, the heart is extracted via some sort of spiritual voodoo of sorts. All right. The what do you call the leader of such a ritual?
The head. I would call him the head priest.
The head priest. All right.
In the movie, his name is Molaram.
Do not say that 3 times. You've already said it twice. You know what happens. Oh, that's right. So he just goes through the skin, pulls the heart out, and then the wound closes.
Yes.
Right now, are you aware that I was born in New Orleans? Like the my grandfather, the 4th generation of my family to be born in New Orleans. I was the 4th generation.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I knew you were born in New Orleans. I didn't know that your family went back that long there.
Oh yeah. So it turns out that the 2 cats that arrived were my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, the former of whom was born in France, went to the Caribbean, then to New Orleans, right? But the point I'm getting at is I'm a close relative to, well, not me, but one of them, to Marie Laveau, who's America's best-known voodoo priestess from New Orleans, right? So she's my cousin. And so my family would actually perform, voodoo ritual-like things that I did not know that's what they were as a child. But when I became an adult in the 90s, there was this woman who had this popular book about voodoo, and I bought it and read it, and I was like, oh, I remember that happening. I remember that happening,
What's an
right?
example?
Yeah.
What's an example of something that your family did?
Well, for example, I noticed that there were bowls of water under the bed. And I never
Mhm.
understood why there was a bowl of water under the bed. So one of the things that they do is you would cleanse the home of evil spirits, and you put these bowls of water under the bed to protect you
Mhm.
while you're asleep, right? Because the evil spirits would go in there. I don't know if they blessed the water or something. Another one was I would have nosebleeds a lot as a kid, and there were 2 nosebleed solutions they gave me that technically are voodoo. And there was 3 actually. So anybody who's watching, if you did any of these, please comment. One was they would make a necklace out of a key and a string. But instead of the key hanging down the front, it hangs down your back
Do you know why?
to cure your nosebleed. The second one
Of
is
course.
holding the nickel under your tongue. And the third one is you take a piece of brown paper bag and put it in your mouth and hold it against the roof of your mouth with your tongue.
I feel like that last one, I have no scientific basis for this, but I feel like that last one actually has some kind of physiological something to it because of like the way that you're
Pressure
like
or
because when I go like it makes me want to tip my head back, which then if I'm like
Oh yeah, I
bleeding
see your
from that
point.
makes me feel like I don't know. There's something about the way that it's
Yeah.
adjusting your airflow and the I don't know. I'm just making
Well,
that
look,
up right
you
now,
don't,
but
you don't need physiological if you have super spiritual. So, the super spirituality of the voodoo world cures your nosebleed. No real science and medicine necessary.
no, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
So
So let me just stop tripping right now. It's been fun, but no, you're not sticking your hand in somebody's chest and them healing immediately afterwards. Ain't happening.
right.
Ain't
Yeah.
happening. All right. Now the second one is the behavior of the human. So I gave the example of in Jim Carrey's movie Dumb and Dumber, even though we're talking
Mhm.
about the Temple of Doom. In the Temple of Doom, again, there's this whole magic situation going on. So the guy remains alive, is able to yell while they lower
Mhm.
him into lava, right? And so,
Yeah.
does that fly? Of course, absolutely not. Not in any way possible. And even in Dumb and Dumber, the guy stands there for a moment and looks, and then when Jim Carrey hands him the bag of his own heart, that's when he like collapses, right?
Well, and here's a fun fact. It didn't fly with the filmmakers either. So when they originally shot that, they created basically an animatronic dummy that was lowered in the cage into the lava so that it would move. And so you could sort of see it flailing around as it was lowered.
And catch
And
it on
they
fire.
Right. And they did, according to, and this is from one of the behind the scenes pieces I was watching. Apparently, they did a wonderful job that was a little bit too realistic because
Ooh.
then when they were testing it, when they were looking at it, it was just, I mean, this is probably the darkest Indiana Jones movie. It's got a darkness to it that's really not as present in the other films. But even that was like too much. So they actually had them add some flames that come up in front of it so that you don't see like the literal flailing around because that just went too dark. That just went too dark. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. It sounds like my memoir. When I wrote it, when I submitted the full manuscript, my editor
Mhm.
was like, you're abusing the reader. We're about to remove a third of this because it's just too awful. I told him, I spoke of all my traumas. So I get that. The third part is really
Wait,
interesting.
hold on. Wait,
Yeah.
I have one more question though,
Yeah.
because so you're saying like, no, that doesn't fly, that the body
No.
wouldn't be moving. But like, what about all the chickens when you cut off their head and they're like still running around? Does that like apply to humans as well if you take out their heart?
We ain't chickens.
Yes, I know that, but still, like
Well,
as you like to point out, we are all animals. We have our DNA has a lot
that's
more in
right.
common than it
Yeah.
does that separates us. So I've learned this from you. So,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not chickens, but could we be like chickens?
They are delicious. In fact, I keep chickens for the eggs. I have my own chickens. I have my own pet chickens behind my house. All right, so back to the whole thing about this guy being alive and well. What it
Yeah.
makes me think about is another dark topic, and I'll get to answer your question in a second because that's going to be related to the third part where I talk about the heart's behavior. Right.
Okay.
So whether even though our full body can't continue to flail around like a chicken does, parts of us may. And one part may be the heart. And let me get to that. But let me tell you about the behavior of a human post heart removal. Could they stand for a few moments? Could they be alive and awake for a few moments? So what it makes me think about is when people talk about victims of a guillotine, how they remain conscious for a little while. There have been reports of people making facial expressions post head removal.
What facial expression would you make post head removal?
Me, I'd be like,
Yeah.
ain't this some... Can't feel my knees. All right. So I'll be like, ain't this a bee? So anyway, beheading. So that also makes me think about how long can you remain conscious once there's a lack of oxygen to the brain? Because that's what immediately comes to mind, is the lack of oxygen to the brain results in loss of consciousness. But I think that when there is a heart removal, there is a second effect. And it's the same thing that occurs with a beheading. And that second effect is a rapid drop in blood pressure. So whether or not cells can continue to extract oxygen from the blood relies on the pressure of the blood itself, right? So when that thing just empties, ouch, I hit my fingers. When that thing just empties, you're not lasting seconds, right? It's a near instant loss of consciousness.
And I mean, is that basically, like, to kind of put it in layman's terms, or things we might have a little bit more experience with than our hearts being ripped out of our bodies?
Yeah.
I mean, is that drop in blood pressure and sort of losing consciousness? I mean, that's basically what you're talking about, what happens when somebody faints. Like, if you have a huge blood pressure drop, the oxygen is suddenly depleted and you go...
Yeah, when you stand up too fast and you're up, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. It's just like having a high priest remove your heart.
That's how I usually think of fainting.
Yeah. So, when I step on stage and everybody starts fainting.
We just can't help ourselves, Dr. O. You just take my breath away.
And your heart. Well, how, some people achieve everlasting immortality their way, and some of us. So anyway, back to this now. So here's where it gets really interesting. So here's what I'm saying. Heart extraction, as shown in Temple of Doom, does not fly. Maintenance of consciousness post heart removal also does not fly scientifically.
Okay.
The third part is the heart continues beating. Does that fly? Now, here is where our chicken comes into play. Yeah. So there's a thing called a neuromuscular junction. So neurons, our nerve cells, actually interface with our muscles. It's like, you have your normal nerve cell, you have the axon that comes down with this myelin sheath. It gets to the bottom, it spreads out into some arms, which spread out to hands, and it looks like they're touching the muscle, but they're actually right over it. And there's a little gap between them and the muscle. And so the neurons do their thing. They send their action potential down, which is a electrical signal. And, at the ends of these little tips, there are these little channels that can open, let ions in, which releases the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter goes to the little receptors on the muscle, which allow their channels to open and ions fly in or flow in, diffuse, and you end up getting a muscle contraction. All right. So the typical muscle, your skeletal muscles, are connected to your brain via brain, spinal cord, and go out to the extremities. But the heart is different.
Really?
Yes. The heart has its own on-board electrical conduction system that has these two nerve, so if you think about the heart is like two pumps together. Each pump has a top and a bottom. All right. So the top, I'm not going to, biology has all these names and physiology has all these names. Forget the names. I'm talking about the function. Okay.
No. Just explain how it works.
I got the names, but I ain't saying them. All right. Okay. So what happens is the top part is the fill chamber and the bottom part is the pump out to the body chamber. So one side of the heart takes in oxygenated blood. The other side takes out unoxygenated blood or blood without the oxygen. So what happens is once it fills, that nerve node, which connects to another node down here, sends a signal that makes the upper half contract. And that sends the blood down into the bottom chamber. Now, that same nerve signal that made the top one contract is ultimately going to make the bottom one contract. But it goes to another node that's between them, another nerve node, and there's a delay in the signal, right? So that's why they don't pop at the same time. This one goes first, and then that signal goes to this node, and it wraps around that entire bottom and then makes it contract. So one signal leaves it push, push. Right? It's pretty cool.
Push.
Yeah, exactly. Push, 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 push. Right.
Push, push, push.
And that's your heartbeat, the gagang.
That's
Gagang.
right. That's your
Gagang.
heartbeat.
Sorry,
Exactly.
I just had a Dirty Dancing flashback. Anyway,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
don't disparage
Listen,
Dirty Dancing.
the dirty dancing, the male dirty dancing, and the grease dancing. I'm like, come on, y'all. That ain't impressive. But anyway. But back to the beating heart. The point I'm getting at is, yes, a heart outside the body will continue to beat for a short while till those nodes run out of energy. It's something it could do. It ain't pumping nothing because there's no blood connections.
Right.
But as far as the beating goes, that does fly.
Okay. So all right. Okay. So I know you broke this down into 3 parts.
Yes.
Give me like your definitive answer on, does the ripping out of the heart fly?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that this heart physiology, the electrical conductivity, how the the nerves that interface with the neurons that interface with the muscles are the best and well-studied neuron behavior in the body. There's so much amazing science that goes there. I find that this is incredibly interesting. So as a viewer or a listener, if you're inspired to go look up neuromuscular junctions and the electrical pathways of the heart and how that works with the chambers of the heart, beautiful stuff, great inspiration, love that part of it. But the removal,
neuromuscular junction.
right?
Junction. Sorry, keep going. Didn't mean to distract.
Hey, was there a biology?
You got 4 heart parts to pump the blood. Dub, dub. Yeah, that's circulation.
I'm just the bill. Anyway, so was there a
definitive answer?
I'm going to say, because the science of that electrical behavior and muscular behavior of the heart is so cool, my overall judgment is it don't matter, it don't fly.
So your answer is it doesn't fly,
It does
but you
not
don't care
fly.
that it doesn't fly.
No,
It does not fly.
no, it ain't. You ain't reaching in no heart in the person. No, Indiana, it ain't happening.
Regardless of the fact that the science may not be sound,
Yes.
does the story support the scene? Did it sell the scene?
Oh,
Right? So there's a lot that goes into figuring out, like, trying to make this scene fly, because it was pretty extreme, right?
yeah.
So I want to start with what you were just talking about, which was the third piece of the science that you said is possible, which is that heart still keeps beating for a few minutes afterwards. So that was something they actually wanted to capture. That's what they talked to the special effects team about. So the mechanical effects supervisor, whose name is George Gibbs, he actually had to build a heart that had like a mechanism inside. It had an electronic motor inside, so that when it was, pulled out, it would simulate beating. And Molaram, the character, when he held it up, it burst into flame, and he actually used a fake arm when he was holding it up so that his own arm would not get all,
Yeah.
so that he would not be himself on fire.
That was
So
smart.
yeah, that was smart. And then other stuff, that they did to really try and make that work. They worked with ILM, with Industrial Light and Magic, which is George Lucas's company.
I have a question for you. In
Yes.
today's filmmaking, would you imagine they would put a heat shield, fire retardant material, and then a green thing over it so you can have a real hand doing it? Or would you go with the fake hand, a safe, real hand that's green screened? Or would you go with a fake hand in today's world?
I mean, it would honestly depend on a number of factors, which is your budget, first and foremost, because
Always.
And look, doing visual effects, which are the effects that happen after shooting that are digitally put in, costs on that have gone way down, but still expensive, still time. You still need like to render things. That's computer power, and you need somebody skilled to do it.
So if
The
you
second thing,
can fake it, you choose to typically? Is that what you're saying?
no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm
Oh.
saying that you can do almost anything digitally these days,
Mm.
but it comes down to a variety of factors, which is, cost, which is what does the shot actually look like? And only director can really decide, does she want something that is a practical effect versus a digital effect, and why? And that depends on what else is happening. It depends on what the background looks like. It might depend on how easy or hard it might be to composite that scene, which is when you marry what's actually shot with what's created digitally. So there are a lot of factors. So there's no easy definitive answer for that. And then, look, there are just some directors who prefer to do things digitally and, do it with visual effects. And there are some who are like, no, I want to light things on fire on set,
Right.
which again, like requires a whole
Yeah.
different, set of like safety and expenses
Right.
and things like that. So there was essentially a torso that they made where it had it had a mechanism inside, and then in the movie, like you see the hand reach in, and then it was designed so that when the hand reached back out, the skin would come back together, which is one of the creepy things that happens, right? It's not just like the hand
That's
doesn't
not
move and
CGI?
doesn't. No, that was actually
What?
a mechanism. Now, what I don't
Wow.
know is whether there was some CGI that was then combined with that. I
Right.
can't speak to that, but I do know it definitely started as well, sorry, I take that back. There were different pieces of it. There was what was shot on camera, and then this was actually shot separately. So yes, there was definitely some combining that happened, but I
Yeah.
don't know the specifics of how like the
Yeah.
piece that was shot with the torso mechanism and then what was done on screen were combined.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I
So
did notice a difference in the typical healing look of,
mhm.
that you see in the movie. It did look different.
Well, something else too that was so I would think that like if you're sticking your hand in and pulling out a heart, there would be a lot of blood. I mean, I've watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy. They take out a lot of hearts. I have seen a lot of hearts in bowls and like dropped on the floor and like glasses dropped in hearts and like I've seen a lot of open hearts on Grace, which of course makes me a medical professional, a medical expert. But I do think it's fair to say that one would expect that if a hand is reaching in and a heart is being taken out, you would see blood. They were given specific instructions that they wanted it to be completely bloodless. This is, like we said, this is a darker movie for the Indiana Jones franchise, but Spielberg wanted some restraint in this case. So
Wise choice, I would say.
yeah, I would say so too.
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
so too.
I mean, those
So
10-year-olds watched it in school,
right? Right? Like not okay.
Not okay.
Not
Yeah.
okay. Not okay. And something else. So that's like one piece of the story. Something else that I feel like kind of needs to be brought up too is, all right, so as we know, this movie was made in 1984. It was the second Indiana Jones movie. I also want to remind people that this is actually a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. So Raiders was made first, but this is a prequel, and then they leapfrog in time with the third movie, and that happens later. So this movie, as we mentioned, is set in India, but they did not actually film in India because India would not let them film there. They had a film board, they needed to see the script, and there were a number of things in the script that they felt were culturally insensitive. And something that we talk about a lot when we're talking about movies now, when we go back and look at movies made several decades ago, is does the movie hold up? I am not of Southeast Asian descent, so I'm not going to personally comment on that because that's another person's culture, but I do think that the fact that India said, we don't like what you're doing in here, we don't like how we're represented, and that in part was because of this scene, because while the cult that they drew from, the Thuggies, was indeed apparently a real thing, they were robbers, they did murder folks, and they did actually do this to serve Kali, the god, this particular god, and they did it in the name of the god. They did not take part in human sacrifice, and India was like, "Yeah, we don't want our culture represented that way." So
Wow. So they took they didn't just
mhm,
make up something whole cloth. They took something that existed and said, yeah, they're cannibals. Or I'm just, throwing that something
well,
heinous out there. That's pretty
yeah.
bad.
Yeah, so the thuggies, the cult, the thuggy cult, that was actually a real thing. I mean, this is sort of a point of like it was something that truly apparently did exist in the culture. They were ostensibly gone by the time this movie takes place. Which is the late 1930s. But then one of the story points is that no, they're not really gone. They're just now a secret cult that is, using children to mine for these power stones that we're going to put all together and then, take over. So that's the thing. Yeah. So when it comes to this scene, though, that is, thinking about like, does this whole scene fly? I think it's hard, with our like 2024 mentality to look at this to not feel that. I thought it was important to go back and see, well, like, am I just looking at that with my 2024 brain?
You
Or,
know what?
when you go back in time and to know that at the time it was made, it was considered problematic. So I think that's important when we're talking about like, does this scene fly?
What I'm hearing is that the writers of this scene became political consultants because this is sounding familiar. They have child slaves. They make human sacrifices, right? That is part of is the phrase zeitgeist now of when people are pointing the finger at the other partisan tribe and they're saying like,
Mhm.
yeah, they eat babies and this kind of stuff, right? They're child enslavers. They're human, like that stuff. People really are saying these kind of things today. And so
Mhm.
that in itself is a shame. And this is consistent with that. So that makes it triply bad for me in that way.
Yeah, I mean, and look, what's also interesting is that if you go back and you read interviews or look at some of like the making of this movie, George Lucas is so just to be clear, Steven Spielberg directed, George Lucas produced. Um, George Lucas is very open about the fact that he was in a really dark place when this movie was being made. I forget if he was in the middle of or just gotten divorced, and I don't know. You've just split with your spouse, and you are making a movie about your heart literally being ripped out of your body. So there's that. And when you look at the indie franchise as a whole, right? Like one of the things that I love about it is that, it's action, it's adventure, but there's a lot of humor as well, right? Like even in the most dire of circumstances, you get that amazing Harrison Ford talent of like being able to like land a quip and you just laugh and you're like in it with him and it's dangerous, but it's fun. You don't actually see that happening in Temple of Doom, right? Like in this scene, there's no quips. There's no like winking to the audience. There's no it's intense and it's serious and it's like it's I mean, you see like at a certain point when Indy becomes he sort of falls under this trance from drinking the blood of Kali, which is one of the things that they have, which, again, is part of this whole ritual sacrifice scene. And basically it puts people into trances.
Mm.
He actually like hits short round. And like it's like that's not okay.
So what you're saying is that it's not intentional, it's circumstantial that it came out this way. Because
What do you
of
mean?
eh, because of what Spielberg was going through in his life. It's not that
George
they
Lucas.
hit
George
it's
Lucas.
huh?
George Lucas, not
George
Spielberg.
Lucas, I'm sorry. So it's not like they were like, yeah, the last one we did it this way. This time let's make it really dark and cut back on that and right. Or
I
they
mean, I
they
don't
weren't
know.
that intentional.
I'm not in their heads. It was
Yeah.
intentional that they wanted to make a movie that had a darker tone.
Mm-hmm.
But it does feel like just from the stuff that and again, I'm not them, not putting words in their mouth, but it does feel like from the stuff that I've read about the making of this and mindset is that maybe they went a little bit darker than they were intending to go.
So
Right.
we've gone in a lot of different directions here.
Mhm.
And some of them are like, great. And some of them are like, ooh. So I'm not sure where you're landing here.
Yeah, so this is a tough one. I mean, when it comes to the story, does this scene fly? Um, I think this is a tough one. I'm gonna say it has a faint beat, um,
Oh,
so to speak. It's beating faintly in the sense that, like, I feel like with the special effects they had at the time, they made it work. So from a technical perspective, definitely works, accomplished
yeah.
what they wanted to. It's a very intense scene. When I think about like how it was received by the country, the people that they were featuring in it, like that clearly didn't fly, and I want to respect that. And then, just when it comes to like just kind of how dark it got, like, did they need to go this dark? I don't know if they needed to go quite this dark. I mean, it definitely ups the stakes for sure. But maybe it's a little too dark for me. So I'm gonna say, like, I get why it was necessary. It works, but it's like a faint beat. It's flying low to the ground.
I think we should we move out from the scene as we look at the third evaluation and go to the movie, where the scene fits into the movie as a whole, society at that time. I mean, where are you feeling
Well,
to land on that?
so actually, I think we can stick with the scene. Tell me what you
Okay.
think of this. So, does it fly for the feels, right? Like,
Yeah.
ultimately, how do we feel about this heart extraction and this scene? And what if here's what I'm thinking. Let's talk about it from the perspective of this is a scene that is, whether we think it flies or not scientifically or story wise, it is an iconic scene. Like,
Indeed it is.
this is a scene people
Yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
a scene that a lot of people know and are familiar with, even if they've never seen the movie,
Right.
for a variety of reasons, And
Yeah.
so, is it worthy of its iconic status? Does it fly as an iconic scene?
Hmm. I think that a big part of that has to do with what we just said, the feels, but I also
Yeah.
feel it has to do with like creating amazing visuals. Like I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
It's so iconic that I say, it shows up in Dumb and Dumber and other places.
Right.
Yeah, and I think of, for example, the movie The Matrix, right? What blew me away, and I'm sure it blew a lot of other people away, were those stop motion ones and then the camera circling around. You know, that was new. We hadn't seen that look before, and now, or I think about the music of Prince, right? Prince was so revolutionary and groundbreaking. No pun intended with the revolutionary statement, but it's hard to see that today. At the time, it's obvious, but later, after it's no longer so novel, the novelty is a big part of its amazingness, right? So now the question I have is that scene carrying forward today. When people think of heart removed from chest still beating, do they think of that
Mhm.
scene, or does that now just completely stands alone and it's its own meme in the world of I'm going to reach in, pull out your beating heart, and show it to you before you die? Right? That's a trash talk element on the basketball court.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's one of those things that has maintained its place in pop culture.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether you think it's done well, not done well, whatever it is, when something attains that status, then
Yeah.
it kind of does fly. But I have another piece to add to it, which
Ooh.
is that, right. So I'm gonna put on my like film historian hat here for a
Ooh, love it,
moment.
love it, love it.
So this scene specifically contributed to a development in movie-going history. This scene is very much in part responsible for the creation of the PG-13 rating.
Really?
Yeah, and
Wow.
ratings are a huge part of how Americans consume movies and how we decide what to go see and how parents,
I know what
decide what
happened
to
there.
allow their children to see.
I know what happened there. I can see it
What
right
happened?
now. The assistant, the teaching assistant in your classroom in the fifth grade
Mhm.
was watching the horror on all your faces and hearing the cries and seeing the little, psychos being made in real time, and said,
Mhm.
no, 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 no. I am going to Hollywood. I'm going to become a part of the regulatory apparatus, and I'm going to make sure that 10-year-olds are never exposed to this, because it's either
Mhm.
R or PG, and this ain't right.
Well, that's pretty close to the truth. So, just to like give a little bit of background. So, when the film industry started, there used to be something in the early days, there used to be something called the Hays Codes. And this was a thing that regulated what could be seen on screen and not. And so, it included everything from like what kind of kissing you could do or not do on screen, toilet gags, things like that, but also things that were horrible, like you couldn't have an interracial relationship on screen.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, don't want that. So don't want that.
I'm in Virginia, and Virginia is for lovers, which has to do with the Lovings trials. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. So, so like, I don't know. I mean, we probably wouldn't have been allowed to do this podcast together. I don't know.
We're both redheads? What the hell?
I know, right? What's up with that? No discrimination against the redheads. Come on. So that was the Hays Code, which eventually, was sort of phased out as things got more modernized. And then eventually you had the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, and Jack Valenti, who ran it during when the ratings were created. This was in 1968. It was that late. So, and all of this has to do too with the idea that like that larger question of should an industry regulate itself or should regulations be imposed upon it. And there were many state and local censorship boards that, in addition to whatever the movie industry said, you can put this in or not put this in, we're like, well, if this is in, we're not going to show it. So, it was like trying to find the sweet spot between like doing what they wanted. And not everybody listened. People flouted these codes. But so MPAA created the rating systems under Jack Valenti's leadership in 1968. And PG-13 was not part of that, right? Like you had G, you had PG, and then you jump straight to R. So at the time that this came out, it was rated PG. And just like you were saying, just like the scene that you created, there were a lot of parents who were like, oh, great, I can bring my kid to see this, no problem. And then they do, and here's this heart being ripped out of a chest, like terrifying kids. And it was a big, big problem. And then the other thing too was that, so this is like 1984-ish, 1984, yeah, 1984. And special effects are in a different place. You can do a lot of different things in movies that you couldn't do before.
Right.
And so movies were becoming more sophisticated, storytelling, the visual art of movie making was becoming more sophisticated. So there was just this need. And, I never knew if it was just kind of more of like an urban legend that like, oh yes, this is the scene that led to PG-13. So I did a little bit of digging on the MPAA website, and no, this is all true. So this is actually in a document that's on there about the history of the rating system. So I'm going to read it. By the 1980s, special effects and other aspects of blockbuster Hollywood films with broad audience appeal created a need for a middle ground between PG and R ratings. Director Steven Spielberg raised the issue with Valenti after a scene in his film Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, featuring a realistic, still-beating heart ripped from the chest of a human sacrifice, angered many parents who had not expected such frightening content in a PG film. Valenti and the MPAA considered the proposal and ultimately made the most significant change to the rating since its inception in 1968. Spielberg recalled, Jack was proactive about it, completely agreed, and before I knew it, there was a PG-13 rating.
Wow.
So there you go.
There's some history for you. I love the dip into history. And have you seen The Lion King? That's my question.
The animated Lion King?
The very first Lion King.
The very first, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I took my daughter there. She was born in 1993. And she was very young, 4 or 3 or something. I don't know. Families got up and walked out during the scene where Mufasa was killed.
Sure.
Yeah. And I don't know what that was rated, but, it was pretty heavy.
Bambi was rated G, and Bambi is like terrifying because of, death scenes that happen. So, ideas of what is kind of acceptable and not over the years have certainly changed. And there's actually like, if you look at the actual like ratings little, widget that's on movies, there's that language that's in there about why it has the rating that it does. That's been developed over the years. And that's actually specific to each movie. That's not boilerplate. Not every movie is given a rating for exactly the same reasons, right? Like some of them have adult language. Some of them have,
so
other
things.
Then.
Does this mean that there is a job for which you get to watch every movie for free?
I mean, I don't know exactly how the whole mechanism of the MPAA works when it comes to ratings, but I do know that if it's going to be released through the MPAA system, they need to see everything. So,
Wow. So I have
if
to.
anyone from the MPAA
Yeah,
is watching this, please feel free to comment and give us more information.
that's right.
And I will say there is a wealth of information on their site if you want to dig into that. I would say when we're talking about does it fly for the feels, is this scene worthy of its iconic status? Does that fly? I'm going to say yes, because it has had an indelible effect on movie history or I should say the movie business and the way that we go about watching movies and the way they're perceived by the public. So I'm going to say, yeah, it flies.
And I'm going to say it flies because, believe it or not, I actually laughed when I saw The Beating Heart, right? I was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. So it definitely flies for me. And it's imprinted in my brain from my childhood or my, I was 17 when it came out and I saw it a little bit later. 19, is that considered childhood? Today, yeah, right?
Yeah,
At
today,
my
maybe
current
not back then.
age, you're a kid at that age. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love Harrison Ford, a man who can go into temples and into outer space.
Is there really anything that he can't do? I mean, although he actually got hurt during the making of this.
That big giant ball, rock ball.
No, although, okay, so just real quick, this has nothing to do with the heart, but sort of fun movie trivia thing. So I've actually seen two different accounts of how he got hurt. One said it was while they were doing elephant riding, just because the way your body sort of moves and it screwed up something in his back. The other was that there's a scene where they do an assassination attempt with the scarfy thing, and that apparently during that he tweaked something. I don't know which or both, but he was out for 5 weeks, which is a long
Holy
time.
cow,
But they wanted to, they're lovely, wonderful people. They wanted to make sure he was okay. And so luckily his stuntman was able, between his stuntman, who actually apparently, has very similar proportions and looks a lot like him, you can cheat it. And the brilliance of Steven Spielberg in figuring out how can we fashion an action scene where we can do a lot of cutting around. They were able to continue shooting for a big chunk. And that includes that scene that you're talking about, which is on the mining track where eventually they're going into a thing where you're going to get crushed. So a lot of that scene is actually with his stunt double because of that.
Wow. See, I learned so much from you. I love it. And if you love learning from Tamara and Dr. O, where can they find us, ma'am?
You can find us online and on socials at Does It Fly Pod. And I will say, give a shout out to our producers who load up the website for every episode with resources and things that you can take a look at. So if you want a deeper dive, then please check it out. And as always, we drop a new episode every Friday. So we'll be back next week with something new for you.
Yay!
Galima.